Welcome to Come to the Well, a sacred space for Christian women who are tired of pouring out everything in their life and they're ready to be filled again. Here we lay down all things that are emptying us, striving, stress, comparison, and we draw from living water that only Jesus can give. I am your host, Colleen, founder of Sustain Well, and my heart is to gently guide you back to rest, truth, and ready to be filled again. Wherever you are on your journey today, you are seen, you are loved, and you are welcome here. Take a deep breath and come to the well with me. Today, I have my special guest, Cheryl Geschke. Cheryl and I have been friends and sisters in Christ for over 15 years. We actually met in a business networking group, and we were doing different businesses. And as life shifts, Cheryl and I are now ministering to women, and we all have an origin story. And I'm so blessed to bring Cheryl on and just have her share from her heart what's been happening in her life. So, welcome, Cheryl, to Come to the Well. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Colleen. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, so Cheryl, we met at a time when you were still having your knitting shop and you were doing Mary Kay, and I can't remember or recall how old your children were at that time, but I know you were in a place where you were just like unsure of where life was taking you. So give us a little backstory of what was going on, back probably 15 years ago, if we want to go back
Okay.
that far.
All right. Yeah, it was a busy time in my life. I think I had two that were heading off to college, and my youngest was still in high school. So trying to attend to his needs, as well as my parents were living with me at the time. So I had my knitting store, and as anyone who has a business knows, you don't just work 9 to 5. You always have things to do, bills to pay, background paperwork to do, and my parents were living with me at the time. So my dad had macular degeneration. My mom was going through a number of strokes, had some heart issues. So I was taking care of both of my parents, which is a blessing and a challenge at the same time because with their needs, it was difficult to have personal time
Right.
because, things popped up. My mom would, have a mini stroke and I'd have to take her to the doctor. Or one time she got her ring caught on her finger and cut it open. And I had to rush home and take her to the emergency room to make sure that she was taken care of. My dad could no longer drive. So I was their immediate caregiver. So I remember one time I was at my store and my dad called me and said, Cheryl, you've got to come home right away. And I was thinking, my gosh, something happened with my mom again. You know, and I go home and he says, I can't get the Cleveland Indians game on. There's something wrong with the TV. So he could not see the remote. And I had to find the button on the remote for him to get the Cleveland Indians so he could watch the game with my mom and mostly listen to it. So that was his entertainment because his vision was not that great.
Right.
So it was important to consider their needs. But in the meantime, I had to close my store, write a little note on the front door saying, I'll be back shortly with a timestamp on it because these things pop up. So I laugh about it now, but at the time it was pretty stressful to, have to leave your business and wonder, are you going to miss a sale or, what is happening?
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure. And I think women today feel that, the pull between children, working, and the expectation of. Tell us a little bit about it, how that felt, closing your store. Did you think, oh my gosh, my income's going to drop? Tell that part of the story.
Okay, yeah, it was a scary time. God works in miraculous and strange ways. So I remember, Christmas time was always a blessed time in my store and the retail, the sales went up. I had more customers, it was that time of year. Well, this particular year that I decided to close the store, it was very strange. So even though it was a holiday, people were not coming in to take classes for whatever reason. It was just an uncanny amount of non-business happening.
Right,
Um, so I think the Lord was telling me, this is I'm not just whispering in your ear, this is a busy season and you're not busy. So it is time for you to close the store and take care of your parents and worry about the kinds of things that are important. And I realize now, which I did not realize at the time, was that God was telling me that it was time to enter a new season of my life. So I decided to do Mary Kay full time at that point because I could flex my schedule.
right.
It was a much more flexible schedule than retail hours. And it also gave me a time to be with my mom and dad. They were very needful of my time and my energy, cooking for them and taking them to doctor appointments and being with them. And I just remember that Christmas being a time where, they lived with me and they could come over and be with the party, be with, the family, have their meals, but then they could go back to their own little space and
Right.
the quiet that they needed and the alone time that they needed too. So it was a difficult time, but a time when, God spoke to me. And I am not the kind of person that can say, "Oh yeah, I heard it, I heard God talking to me in my ears or in my heart." But those kinds of things, if you listen to them, looking back at it, I know that God meant for me to be with my parents, and I will never regret the time that I spent taking care of my parents.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I'm glad you shared because how often do we miss that opportunity? You still push back and you could have still kept the store going and really got into some financial stress and really it could have put a toll further on your health and put distance between you and your parents. So
Yeah.
it's nice that you talk about that.
Yeah, and, you know, everybody knows the story of Mary and Martha, and we are all Marthas at many stages of our lives. We're taking care of ourselves and our kids and our parents, and I was in that sandwich generation, and it gave me a moment to say, we need to be more like Mary
Right,
and sit and listen to what God is telling us. Even if it's not in our head or in our heart,
right.
life happens, and I think those kinds of things are really evident of where God wants us to be.
No, I'm glad you said that because I think we need to sit and have more merry moments, that pondering and kind of ask, why are you closed? Why do you want me to close the store? Why is this happening? And I think in today's world, these women don't even take the time to sit a minute to see why is my child sick or why do my parents need me or why am I going through this? Because the stress and the pressure of the material world. I'm sure you see that with your adult daughter and son, your kids.
Exactly, exactly. They all have stresses and, trying to keep their houses clean and take their kids to all the activities, and I do see it, and it's hard to kinda impart those things on your adult children because they're grown-ups and they have their own thoughts and, they're not always interested in hearing what you have to say.
So I want to ask your one son was still at home with you when your parents like lived with you, correct?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that was my youngest son, Matt,
Okay.
and he often, if I could not make it to take my dad to an appointment, he was the one that was kind of saddled with that responsibility, and he did a great job, I have to say. There were times when he would run up and get Chinese for my parents and bring it home or take my dad to an appointment, or one time we had a band party at our house, and it was basically in the garage. My parents were living with me, and my dad would, come outside and say, What is all this racket going on here?" And and that's not what a teenager is meant to hear
Right.
oftentimes, and so Matt was really gracious and just letting those things happen.
Right. So as he saw things change and he got older, do you think it really has made an impact on his life?
I do, I do. He is now the full-time caregiver for 3 kids while his wife is working, and in this day and age, that's kind of an uncommon thing, so he is bearing the responsibility, and although, parenting 3 young kids, all under 6, I think it provides a lot of challenges, so I occasionally remind him that this is a gift that he has, that the kids
Right.
aren't going to be around for very long. They grow so quickly, and to have patience with the kids. And so I think it goes for dads as well as
Right.
moms that you need to kind of, decide what are the important things to reprimand about and what are the things that
Right.
we should let go and just be with the kids.
Well, and it's just sort of interesting, and that's why I asked that. He was being nurtured by you, the Mary, so to speak, and seeing, and then he just pivoted and found that that's his calling and didn't fight it where most men would. So that's a testimony to, you as a mom and showing him the way to care for people.
Oh, thanks, thanks. I mean, he had some difficulties, as we all do.
Right.
And I think what I see in his marriage is that the 2 of them work as a team just to get everything done. And so it's such a blessing to see that. And they live out of state, so it's really hard, to hear and see the challenges when we do visit with them, knowing that I can't just pop in and say, "Take the afternoon off,
Right.
and I'll watch the kids for you." So we try to we with our blended family, we have 5 children kind of all over and 11 grandchildren, and, I wish that I could be with them more physically present,
Right.
but God has other plans for me.
Right, right, exactly. And I think too, we have to kind of dive into that at that time when you had 2 in college and your son and your parents, weren't you going through a difficult marriage at that time too?
Yeah, I was already, a single parent at
Okay.
that time. So, yeah, the stresses of being a single parent have played into the fact that, you kind of have to live differently, and one of the difficult things of being a single parent is, Christmas mornings where you have to get the kids ready to visit with the other parent. And that was a really hard time for me for a lot of years, knowing
Right.
that, the kids are going off and I'm now home. So thankfully, that's another reason that I was glad that my parents lived with me because it gave me a purpose and it gave me a reason to not be alone.
Yeah. God had a definite hand on everything that was going on, in
Right.
your life. So you closed the shop and you did Mary Kay full time, and that was a blessing. And then, when, what pivoted, you're trying to run this, business, giving free time. What shifted into who you are today?
Oh gosh, there's lots of things. And when you look back, when you're going through something, you don't necessarily see what God has in store for you. But when you look back, it becomes a lot more evident. So truly, the pivoting came when I did our church parish retreat called Christ Renews His
Right.
Parish, where it gave me a chance to reflect on things and all the things that I did wrong, thinking about God forgives. I wish I'd done more with my kids. I wish I'd
Right.
done more with my parents. I wish there were a lot of things that I regretted and felt guilty about in being a parent. And I think that looking back on it, that was really a pivotal point in my life because it showed me that you can make mistakes. You can not be the perfect person, and Jesus forgives you and God
Right,
forgives you, but I had trouble forgiving myself.
right,
So, it was at that point that started my journey where my Catholic religion became more important to me. I
right,
began to look into the Bible. Really, growing up, I had never known Bible verses
right,
or the stories in the Bible, and so that began my journey
right. And I think
to find God.
yeah, and I think not only that, but you said something that I think our listeners really need to hear is that that perfect, as women, we try to be the perfect mom, the perfect spouse, the perfect, the band mom, we try to strive for perfection and we feel guilty because we're not doing, enough. And when people text me and say, I apologize for, not texting you soon, I'm like, no, stop apologizing. That's one step in that guilt and shame world. But God doesn't want us to be perfect.
Yes, we weren't made to be perfect for sure.
Take some time for yourself on a church retreat or a non-denominational retreat. Just sit quietly like you did, Cheryl, to really open up that window to, say to him, "Here I am, broken," and all that kinda,
Right.
junk.
Right. Yeah. And so, and it's not that I changed overnight either.
Right,
In the last 15 years, I think I've grown a lot and I still have a lot of places to grow in my spiritual life, in my parental life, in my current marriage, which I am so blessed to have met my current husband. He really has taught me a lot about what it is to be a Christian, and I will forever appreciate that. But I've also learned that I am not perfect, and like you said, God doesn't expect us to be perfect. We are perfectly broken, and so I'm at a stage in my life where, I'm trying not to compare myself with other women and trying to
right,
do what God has called me to do. So if my house isn't in perfect shape, I'm a paper collector, so before we have a party, I stuff probably, a foot worth of paper away so it can't be seen. But I'm not I'm not perfect, and I think that if we stop comparing ourselves
right,
to other women and just compare ourselves to where we were yesterday. Am I a
right.
better person than I was yesterday?
Yeah, I like how you said that, just compare ourselves to yesterday. What did I do yesterday? And that's kind of where I need to get better at that reflecting in the evening, taking some time to say, okay, what didn't go, so well? What did I miss in the day? You know, let's just go to how did you meet, Mark? He's such a lovely man. And I remember, I was walking with you at the time where, you were yearning for a companion. The parents had passed and you were just kinda, your
Yes.
beautiful soul was kinda dimmed.
So, and God works in beautiful ways. So, my father, had, just passed away. He was in the hospital. He had had an aortic aortic aneurysm. And, I remember he could hear me, and he could the first day after his surgery, he could hear me because he would, squeeze my hand when I asked him something or told him something. And so I said, "Dad, I'm so sorry that I never had the kind of marriage that you and mom had, and thank you for everything." And so we knew that he was going to pass. We were just waiting for my sister to come into town. And so I was able to have that time with him, even though he couldn't speak to me. I had that time actually before his surgery. He even told me that he was ready for what God had in store for him.
Mhm.
And he kind of knew that it was a very dire situation. And he thanked me for those years that they lived with me. And that was such a gift to be with
Right,
my dad when he passed. And so I always appreciate that. So moving forward, our priest at church always mentioned the people who had passed away the previous week, and so they had mentioned my dad's name. And in church, actually, it was the 4th pew every week for the past, you know, previous to my dad passing away. There was this guy in church, and our priest said, you know, introduce yourselves to the people around you. So Mark introduced himself to me. And then the week that my dad died, he came up to me and offered his condolences and said, you know, I too took care of my parents. I would love to, you know, share my story with you and have a cup of coffee. And God and Father Walt at our church and my dad, I feel, were all working together to bring us together. And what a beautiful way is to find somebody in church,
Right.
in the actual pew. I mean, again, it was a time when God wasn't whispering in my ear, he was yelling, "Cheryl, you know, pay attention. The gifts that I have in store for you are abundant." And so we met for coffee, and my mom was still alive at that time, and so he got to, meet my mom and ask my mom for my hand in marriage and
Aw.
be with me for her passing and to get me through that. So, it really, you know, it brings tears to my eyes every time I tell that story because it's so clear
Right.
God had a hand in that. And
Right.
I really didn't think that I would have another chance at that point. I had laid my life before God and said, "Whatever you have in store for me." And they were all very welcoming, and, it's just been he teaches me every day how to be a Christian and how a woman should be treated, so I'm very grateful for that. Hello?
All right, part two. We're right at meeting Mark, and we'll get this version. We met Mark, and it was a blessing. So let's pick up where we left off.
Okay. So Mark had also taken care of both of his parents, and His story is kind of interesting too, in that his mom said, "If you ever put me in a nursing home, I'll haunt you forever." And his dad, had fallen, and it was a winter day, I think it was in January, and they couldn't find him overnight. So the Macedonia police were looking for him, and they found him stuck in the mud, and that was the beginning of a deep decline for him. So he had one parent in a rehab and nursing home facility, and this other parent was at home insisting to still live at home. So he had nurses there pretty much 24 hours a day. And, his dad continued the decline, and his mom passed away, I think, first, and then his dad passed away within the next 6 months. So it was within a very short amount of time. So he was being the Martha in his family
Right.
because his siblings were out of town, so he was juggling, taking care of 2 parents in 2 different places, plus a full-time job and all of that. His job entailed traveling, which he had to postpone for a long time, so, that too, he had been through a difficult time in his life, so he was really a blessing to help me get through those difficult days when you feel like you're alone and you're taking care of your I was taking care of my mom at the time, and, it was just a really difficult time that he was there to help support me. And his mom, I never met her because his parents had both passed away by the time we met, but his mom was the kind that always brought the family together, and I know the holiday times can be really stressful, and, sharing time with all of the family members, working around everybody's schedule and trying to get them together, and maybe one person can come this day, but not that day,
Right.
and so Mark always keeps me grounded in saying, "We'll just work around everybody's schedule. Whoever can make it, on the day that we're all supposed to get together, we'll make that happen
Right.
and then work around it." So, and I think his mother set the example for not getting into family drama
Right.
about schedules and, family members coming into town or not coming into town. So I wish I had met her because I feel like, she raised her family very, very well. And, Mark's children and their families are all very respectful also. He teaches me something new and grateful every day. So I appreciate that. And, it came to I saw it. I had some trials and tribulations, our life was going along well. We got married almost 8 years ago,
Wow.
and that too was a blessing. So there was, we wanted our priest to marry us in the Catholic Church, and we wanted all of our kids to be there. That was the most important thing.
Right.
And there was one weekend in 2018 where all of the kids, could be there.
Wow, that's
So
great.
that was the weekend that, they all converged in Cleveland, and, we had our wedding day, and it was, just a beautiful, beautiful time. So,
Wow.
again, I thank the Lord for every day that Mark is with me, and it was especially true this year because, we had 7 lovely years, and then, this February, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, as you know,
Right.
Colleen, and so, when you hear the word cancer, you just think of or many people think of it as, the beginning of the end, and I am here to tell you that although I would never wish anyone to have cancer, it provided me a time to reflect, a time to know that Jesus was beside me and my family was very supportive. My daughter came into town the day of my surgery. God was telling me to slow down and appreciate life.
Yeah.
And, when you look at having cancer, that's not the first thing you think of. But as I was being rolled into the operating room, I had a request that the staff or the team play Christian music,
Right.
and when I walked in or was rolled in the room,
Yeah.
didn't walk in because they've already got you sedated, and I can't remember the song that they played, but I know that it was Christian music, and someone on the surgical team said, "This is different music. We don't normally hear this while we're operating." And somebody else said, it was a patient request, and so, it was at that time that I first remember, like, letting tears roll down my eyes
Mhm.
before the surgery. And I have to tell you, I had such a peace before my surgery, and the only thing that I can explain, uh, again, God works in miraculous ways, is that I was bold in asking for prayers. Asked my Bible study women to pray for me, so everybody knew that I had cancer. I was in a Lenten program, and the deacon at our church anointed me the day before my surgery. People, brought meals and prayed for me and sacrificed their days for me and brought me meals. And, it was just a beautiful time if you look at it,
Right.
of people being there for me and prayers being answered. So my recovery, it was caught in early stages. I was stage 1 and I had a partial mastectomy, but it gave me time to kind of think about what's important in life, and it's the people in my life
Right.
that are the most important. So, it was a journey that I don't wish on anybody, but
Right.
I was able to reach out to other people who had cancer. So, I am always open to anyone who needs to talk about it, or if they've been diagnosed or feel hopeless. I'm here to provide hope
Yeah.
because they caught it early, it was treated, and now it's in the rearview mirror.
Right. And it's kinda like God put you in that Mary season right away. You went to from Martha to
He
Mary
did.
very quickly, you know what I mean?
He
It's like,
he
"Okay,
yeah,
here you go."
absolutely, he did. So it was a time that I had to reflect on all how all the, grace that I have been given, the time that, I appreciated all the things that people had did for me. It was a time for me to pull out that Bible and look at the Bible. Um, and I've done Bible studies, and just it gave me a time to kind of sit and reflect on all the things that God has done for me and all the second chances he has given me. So I feel very fortunate in that respect. And I'd also like to say, God is telling me to do something with my story. So I am not afraid to answer any questions about it. I want to share the story. I want to encourage people to get their health taken care of because my cancer was caught early because I was diligent in going to the doctor and having those tests and having things taken care of.
Thanks so much, Cheryl, for sharing your story of healing, motherhood, and so much. We were blessed to actually have Cheryl with us talking about her whole life story. And we are grateful that it can be a story of hope and healing for all of you listeners today. And if you want to reach out to Cheryl to get hope for her cancer story, reach out to me at Sustainawell and I can get you the connection to Cheryl. Thanks, Cheryl, for spending time at the well. May you be refreshed, grounded, and held by God's love. Until next time, come to the well.